So, Eddie, can you summarise what's going on nationally in this wonderful green isle of ours?
Well, firstly, you have to remember that the Irish economy really is part of the picture that Mark has presented. We're very open. We behave very much like an Asian tiger economy. In other words, we can grow very, very fast because we're so open to global growth. But we're also then open to the shocks, probably 1.5 times more than many other economies. I'm giving the positives first. We've a young population. We've plenty of room for growth. We've huge deficits in housing, as you know, and infrastructure that all has to be dealt with over the decade or so ahead. So we have a lot going for us. We've a young population, all of that kind of thing. So we can actually grow quite quickly. The great problem, as Mark has pointed out, is that really for over a decade, there has been a massive intervention in, I suppose, in you want to call it capitalism, and the intervention has been by central banks. So central banks have come together and simply said that any time the global economy has shown any sign of sagging, think of it as a patient, Linda. You'll find it easier to understand. We just give it a massive dose, another dose of steroids, massive dose of steroids. So that's what's happened again in COVID-19. This time the dose of steroids is just huge. It's about an amount of money equal to about a quarter of the entire global GDP created out of nothing in keyboards. That's the extent of the stimulus. So we're a bit like somebody who's about to go into the Olympics, thinking that we are a fully fit and ready athlete, when in point of fact we're absolutely soaked in steroids. We have been for a long time, and we feel good, but actually we're not. The global financial system is creaking under all of this massive amount of money printing, and the only way we're in a trap now in Ireland, because we are members of the Eurozone, the debt level is going to such a level now. The global financial system is creaking under this massive mountain of money printing. And the only way it is sustainable is by keeping interest rates at zero or less than zero for a very, very long period of time, which is why you're seeing negative rates coming into bank deposit accounts. And you're also seeing it across most of government bonds in developed markets. It's a very serious change. Meanwhile, for the first time since 1973 to 1983 in Ireland, you're going to start seeing consumer prices rising, and probably towards the back end of this year, certainly into next year, because of the glut of capital created from all of the money printing. And now the counter argument that people make is that all of the excess kind of capacity in economies can be used to mop up all the increased pressure coming through from too much demand because too much money is being created. But I don't think that's going to happen this time around. That's a view that's becoming more widely shared, and that we are entering an inflationary cycle. Now you might say, well, what's the big deal? Well, it's a very big deal for a lot of people who are relying on their savings to see them through, when they find that they lose maybe every year 3 or 4% permanently of their savings in real purchasing in purchasing power. And it's also a very big deal for people that are relying on pension funds, people that are on fixed incomes in retirement. Really big deal. And you know, the truth is then that those that are managing all of this, politicians, asset managers, they're all part of the conventional groupthink on how all this is going to play out. And none of them, with the exception of those who are in their 80s now, has any memory at all of managing money, managing economies through a high inflationary cycle. It's all in textbooks, hasn't happened for so long, and that's where we're going. So I think that if I was to say to people listening, look, the one thing to take out of all of this is that Ireland is highly likely, despite all of the good things we've going for us, like every other economy, to enter into a high inflationary cycle at some stage over the next few years, and it's going to change everything. There's some positive changes if you're carrying a lot of debt, obviously, and you can manage your way through it. But really, it does mean that the currency itself, the paper currency we have, the euro, the dollar, all paper currencies are going to be severely tested. And meanwhile, back at the ranch, we have the World Economic Forum, comprised of the wealthiest companies in the world, all seeing this coming, knowing we're in a trap, and coming up with their formula on how we should run our lives, which is the Great Reset. It's not a conspiracy theory. You can actually go to the conspiracy theory on the website of the World Economic Forum, and you can read all about it. It's there. It's black and white. That's their formula. That's what they want to do. So this is where, there's an attempt really, I think, to reduce the impact of local democracies, bypass all of the chambers of democracy, and implement the views of this technocracy. NEFIT is a technocracy. In our case, it's part of the state intervention, bigger state, more intervention, and the World Economic Forum agenda really appears to thrive in the idea of lockdowns, because it might form part of its CO2 management challenge. But one way or the other, whatever way we do it, we're being told by the wealthiest nexus of power brokers really in the world how we should manage our affairs while they continue to do what they're doing. And that's the problem I have with the World Economic Forum. That's what got me into all of this. That's where I started doing my reading, and found to my shock that they had been planning this for a long time, for 6 or 7 years. It's not just because of COVID. COVID is an opportunity to implement the agenda. Across then at the IMF, which is a huge impact. We're a member of the IMF. I mean, the IMF is what people rely on when countries go burst. The IMF agenda is again focusing on a big pivot happening in global finance. And the head of the IMF, who's a Bulgarian PhD from before the destruction of the Iron Curtain, she's of the view that that we're at a Bretton Woods moment, which is, Mark will understand, and it's all happening again. It happened in 1946, and that we're going to have to reconstruct the global, a new type of global currency. So there is a big pivot coming, and it's coming in the area of currency.
What was the name of the chap who spoke at Davos, and was, he just said, we're not talking about the big issue here, which is none of you guys here who flew in your private planes are paying tax. So, for ordinary people, how have these people been allowed to become so outrageously and obscenely wealthy?
Well, all history is bristling with examples of how countries have always been taken over or consumed by the most powerful, because that's what they do unless you stop it from happening, and it's resisted. And that's just human nature. I mean, which it wasn't that way, but it is. You might say, well, how did it happen? Well, I mean, the most powerful country in the world, the United States of America, its government has been captive to the wealthiest people in America for a long, long time. And that's coming in over here. I mean, I would argue that the Conservative Party in Britain became captive to the same type of forces and thinking, which is really driven by the accumulation of power and wealth. But where we are today is that these organizations, this nexus of companies, it's not a conspiracy. It's not like a Hollywood conspiracy, right? It's just power and how it operates. But the nexus of technocracies really have got closer and closer together. Central banks printing money, creating extreme wealth for the extremely wealthy, the middle classes and working classes being bypassed. And now we're facing a huge wave of artificial intelligence coming in, which is going to remove the requirement to work, is going to generate a new underclass or useless class, I think was an awful term used to describe it. And that the response to that then will be, we're now going to shift to, or the proposal is we will shift to the idea that central banks will get much closer to big government and will simply print money and send it directly to consumers in the form of income benefit. In other words, this is going to be central bank dole, which they've been dishing out to national governments and corporations, which Mark discussed for the last decade and longer, is actually going to be dished out to consumers. It's called modern monetary theory. So instead of controlling by increasing interest rates, the braking system is to increase interest rates. You'll simply increase taxes to try and cool down economies that have too much cash in it, and that people will be paid to behave like battery hens and live at home and maybe do some community service, while more and more of work is going to be consumed by artificial intelligence and robotics. That's the vision of Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, by the way. That's not just me estimating it. I mean, he's a very great enthusiast about the link between the human biology and robotics, that will be chipped and hacked and all of that kind of good stuff ahead of us. I mean, it's real dystopian stuff, but it's been planned. I mean, that's the point. Like, this isn't sci-fi; it's planned. And people need to see it.
He's 82, that man, and I imagine him stroking that white cat, as in one of those Bond films. I can't remember who the character was, but I mean,
but Lindy, don't make the mistake of thinking that this is the agenda of a single individual.
Yeah,
that
what
looks
is
like
the story? Yeah.
I mean, this has been going on for a decade. It's long term. It's long in the planning. It's highly resourced. Go onto the website. You will see. You go into this big circular pie chart. You can click and you can go deeper and deeper and deeper into the planning into the plans and planning, and that's being pushed down into national governments as the way it should be done. And if you follow what's being said at the IMF, it's mirroring it. It's mirroring part of the agenda. And the same with Lagarde, who's gone in as head of the ECB.
Yeah.
She's now talking about digital currency, the euro, cyber euro. So it's all beginning to click into place. Along comes COVID-19. We all imprison ourselves in our homes. We plug in and listen to Pravda every day, RTE, producing its scary numbers. With leaks from the establishment to the Irish Times in the afternoon that are published as speculative pieces the next day. That's then reported as it says in the newspapers between 6 and 8 in the morning. Those decisions are made, and that sets the national news agenda for the day. They scare the shit out of everybody to imprison themselves at home. And you might say, well, are they doing that out of malintent? No, they're doing it because they themselves are frightened about what's going on. We're not standing back and maybe looking at alternatives. And I think when the dust settles and all this and we look back, there's going to be a big inquiry into the type of decisions that were made at the time and what the motivations were. But certainly for me, I grew up in a time, in Cork we had a single channel. It was black and white. And the odd time on a Saturday night, you'd have a Hammer horror movie broadcast. And the main scene usually ended in the graveyard, with the smoke coming in, and that's when the vampires would come out, with the and scare you. So that was the Hammer horror, and I just gave up watching it. I mean, all George Lee and Bowers were short was the makeup and the teeth, and it was clearly designed that way to keep people really frightened about what's going on, keep hitting them with the statistics. And that's been done with great success.
But why on earth?
If you want to really understand what's going on, you've got to try and plug your head out of the state machine, bureaucracies. The whole function of the organisation that runs states, let's call it the deep state. I don't mean in the American sense. I mean in the Irish sense. Its function in all countries is of the organism is to survive and thrive. And the way bureaucracies do that is they just get bigger. If you want to understand that, you just watch episodes of Yes Minister, and you'll see you can laugh while you learn. But it's true, and that's what happens here. You've asked there earlier on, Lindy, a very, very interesting question. Why are we listening to this? Why is this happening? Yeah. Well, the same mentality that is driving all this data at us over the last 12 months. Oops, I think I'm gone there, am I? Anyway, the same. I don't know if you can hear me there.
Carry on.
Anyway, I'm back there. So the same mentality that has driven this over the last 12 months is the same thinking that pushed the Children's Hospital into the James's site.
Yeah.
Giving us the most expensive hospital in the world, and anything that goes with that. And we all sat back and looked at it. And that's the problem. We looked at how can you radicalize a moderate population? How do you do it? The answer is by propaganda, by continuously pressing the same message. It's how the German society was radically transformed in the 20s and 30s, and how a large part of American society was radically transformed over the last presidency. And here we are wondering, how is this happening in Ireland? And it's the same tools are being used. I can tell you that at the start of all of this, RT presenters would have been given their instructions. We were in a state of emergency. So, I mean, if you're plugging into RT, I'm not just picking on them. If you're plugging in conventional media that plug into RT, it is a nexus. You're not getting news. You're getting information management during what they regard as almost like a time of war. And it's very, very difficult in that. I mean, Mark makes an interesting point about the property bubble. I remember at the time talking about property prices, and it was like standing in front of a herd of buffalo coming at you in the middle of a desert, and your sign is up saying this water is poisoned. You have no hope. They'll just trample you to get at the water. And that's where we are when you look at those people who are trying to stop you running down the road without a mask, Lindy. They don't realise it, but they've been radicalised by the same blizzard of propaganda over the last 12 months. And behind the scenes, there are scientists pulling their hair out, leading medical people, trying to point out the stuff. So I'm reading, I'm no medical expert, about the nature of the events that turn up in hospitals coming from obesity and coming from diabetes and those type of illnesses. Really are the major part of the problem, and this could have been done in a far more surgical and targeted way, but we are where we are. And once you get political capital and medical politics as well, capital behind these events, it's very hard to stop them until it's all over, and then we'll have the reviews and inquiries and looking back to learn our lessons. But really the way we've managed this has been, I think in hindsight, when all the dust is settled and all the historical results are in, will have been deemed to have been an unmitigated economic catastrophe that was avoidable had it been done differently.
Well, but the other big question is, why have our democratic structures become so eroded? And since they have, as we know, is there any solution? What can we do? I mean, I don't bother voting anymore, I have to say. There's no point.
Mark, do you mind if I just take that one on an observation? Because I deal a lot with the media. A deeply worrying aspect to this in Ireland and in other countries, but especially in Ireland, is that the Irish conventional media, journalism, has been enormously weakened. It has been hollowed out over the last decade.
We were talking about that before the show,
yeah. Newspapers are working on fumes. Yeah. Editors are working 50, 60, 70 hours a week trying to get newspapers out and journalism done. The journalists themselves, including our best investigative journalists who I deal with regularly, so the actual energy isn't there from very important part of democracy, that you've got independent journalists that are challenging the establishment, the status quo. That's gone. It's not there. And I mean, if you look beyond RTE, for example, last year, it was quite clear that News Talk was being softened. It was turned from a news organisation to a magazine organisation. There was a lot of people ringing into programmes talking about their feelings, which was fine, very entertaining, but it wasn't hard news. And that was softened because Dennis O'Brien was required to sell News Talk as part of his restructuring. So they walked off the pitch just at the wrong moment. So therefore, where was the voice? The national news agenda is set in RT in the morning, before Morning Ireland starts. That drives it throughout the day. So we had the ideal way of getting a homogenous herd-like reaction from the Irish, completely absent independent, strong-willed, strong-minded journalists with the capacity and resources to properly investigate all the issues that you're talking about. It just hasn't happened in the mainstream. And these type of discussions have been thrown to the sidelines. And the people who are doing them are labelled nutcases and conspiracy theories. Yeah, Mark, if I could just make two quick points there. Firstly, suicide data isn't currently being collected because the coroner's offices are closed for the last, for most of the last 12 months. So we don't have any data, and the data that's being collected by the CSO is a nonsense, and they know it because they're basically saying it themselves. The data isn't accurate. So our suicide statistics, for example, up until I think the third quarter last year, showed a fall, I think, of around 75%. And of course, that's because the coroner's offices inquiries are not happening. So you can park aside all of that. I can tell you that as we speak, there's a document beginning to float around from the TUI, the Teachers Union of Ireland, about their up and coming Congress. And one of the motions from, I think, Dublin C&C is that the schools shouldn't be reopened unless all of the children have vaccine passports.
Oh, God.
So when you're talking about where the fights are going to be, that's what so sensible people within the TUI are going to have to fight that there. There's going to be all these micro challenges that are going to go on throughout the length and breadth of Irish society, where people are, as Mark said, people are going to have to stand up and put, the tall poppy thing, put their head up above and say, sorry, we've had enough of this. Science, there's other science to this. I'm not listening to this any longer. I'm not a nutcase. What I'm saying is completely backed by medical and medical science, as well as economics and all of that kind of stuff. And of course, what will happen in reality in Ireland, we all know it, is that we'll be last to open up. We want to be the good boys of Europe, and we'll take our lead from when it's proven in other countries, and then we'll be clapping ourselves on the back on a job well done. Unfortunately, it could have been done an awful lot better. The way you counteract the centralisation of power in the imperial capital in Brussels is that you push power back down from the national chamber to local government.
Exactly, but
and you empower local government.
Yeah, but how do we revive? I think that's the nub of it. How do we revive local government in this country?
Well, unfortunately, Linda, you're going to need a new generation of thinking politicians that are elected to the national chamber, not on the basis of the shoe leather of going around and seeing voters as clients, and actually people that are prepared to talk about policy and change and leadership. But we do have a political establishment at the moment, unfortunately, that lead from behind, catch the populist mood of the people and just keep pounding that message. So it's up to each individual one of us when we go into that vote with a little drop of ink and a piece of paper or a pencil on what box you tick. And it does come down to that moment. I can tell you, I mean, I don't really hold to a lot of the criticism of the millennial population. I think that the young people that are coming through are highly educated, well able to think, not as well organised yet as they will be because they're young, but that will change with responsibility and so on. So there's deep change coming, and we do have a highly educated population, well capable of thinking for itself. But the way you deal with propaganda is you have to call out the propagandists. You have to be prepared to stand up and say, sorry, that's not news. Yeah. That's not news you've been feeding me every night for the last year. Your job has been to scare the shit out of me, and I'm not taking it anymore.
Well, I think we have a job because the education system is a bit weird as well. But I'm with Eddie. I totally agree that fortunately when you're involved in sport, you are involved with younger people, and some of the young people I know are absolutely wonderful. And I would also recommend to everyone to start growing potatoes in their backyard and carrots and onions and the rest of it. And let's get ready for for whatever that something like one of those horror films you were watching, Eddie, when you were a young lad.
I know. I mean, I didn't want to make it sound like it's Armageddon. I mean, high inflation and all of that, and we'll go down the middle of the road. But like at the end of the day, I think the message is to start thinking for yourself. Yeah. Go and do the research. Don't be listening to me or to Mark or to anybody else. Go and look for yourself. You'll come to your own beliefs just by looking at the facts. Open your mind. Stop just taking the data feed and start thinking for yourself. And you're going to get quite surprised by what you find when you go and you do the reading.